Hello, this is the Promotory channel. Today we're going to take apart this gearbox. This is an Eaton gearbox. The model just appeared on the screen. This gearbox was taken from this type of vehicle. A subscriber came to me for repairs. Engine repair, gearbox repair. I haven't worked on gearboxes like this before. Actually, I've never worked on Eaton gearboxes before. I haven't even seen them in person yet. So this will be my first time. And honestly, it's also the first time I've seen this kind of gearbox installed on a Maschinenfabrik Augsburg Nuremberg. Before this, I had a Maschinenfabrik Augsburg Nuremberg. It had a Zahnradfabrik 16S150. The Maschinenfabrik Augsburg Nuremberg was exactly the same model, the same crossbar there, the same mounts. I remember everything was exactly the same down to the bolts. But we can see that here we have an Eaton gearbox, not a Zahnradfabrik. What do I notice at first glance? We can see that the shafts are accessed through this top cover. So the housing doesn't split in half. The cover is removed. The rear cover is taken off, and that's basically it. The housing is solid. In theory, this should be a 16-speed gearbox. In this area, we have the demultiplier under this cover, as I understand it. And somewhere around here, this is where the actual gearbox is. That's just me thinking out loud. Just some initial thoughts. And also, as I understand it, somewhere around here we should have the splitter. Basically, these are just my thoughts out loud for now, so to speak. So the oil has already been drained and the oil is clean. And in general, there don't seem to be any problems with this gearbox. It's just that the customer, while the engine is being repaired, decided to do a gearbox inspection. That is, to replace the bearings, maybe the oil seals, and so on. Well, we'll take it apart and see what condition the cones are in, and just see how everything looks overall. Maybe the synchronizers here are built a little differently. At least that's what I saw in the video. They look more like ZYL ones, I guess. Well, anyway, as always, we won't guess. We'll take it apart to find out. I'm starting disassembly first. I remove the casing. Then this jumper, then the flange, and then the rear cover. After that, I'll probably take out the splitter and remove the top cover, and then we'll take out the shafts. That's it. So that's the scope of work we have. Let's go. So I'm taking apart the gearbox, and we can see that the synchronizers here are similar to, let's say, the ones in a ZIL 131 gearbox, or for example in a KMAZ gearbox. Well, I mean the structure, right? That is, it's non-disassemblable. The sleeve, the hub, the cones. That is, everything comes as an assembly. Well, as far as I can see, these teeth here are rounded. And the customer had questions specifically about the splitter. And we can see that the teeth on the splitter are rounded. So, as I understand it, we need to replace this synchronizer assembly, and most likely we'll also have to replace this gear because these teeth are not removable. So we have a solid gear here. I can see the ring comes off and it's sitting on a bearing. So it turns out we need to replace this gear and the splitter synchronizer. Let's take it apart further and see. I also notice a very interesting thing. We have two intermediate shafts. It turns out they duplicate each other. I'll also say a few words about the Demultiplier once I take the camera off the tripod. There's an interesting design there as well. I've never seen anything like this before. Now I just need to figure out how to get the shafts out of here. As I understand it, I need to take out the reverse gear now anyway. The intermediate gear of the reverse. I still don't quite understand in what order I should remove the shafts. Alright, the secondary shaft. First, likely the intermediate shaft, then the secondary, and then the second intermediate shaft. Alright, let's see. As I understand it, I need to take out the intermediate reverse gear now, as well as remove the gear that goes to the demultiplier on that side. Alright, let's try. Okay, while my camera is set up here, I'm unscrewing the oil supply tube on the shaft of the intermediate reverse gear. The customer was most interested in checking the condition of the bearings. Every time I take apart the gearbox, the bearings are in excellent condition. I don't know how well you can see it on camera. Usually, when this race, there are already dense inclusions or pits. Here we see a shine, just a mirror-like shine. No complaints at all. I don't know. Probably the bearings will stay as they are for this gearbox. So, to remove this race, you need to take off the oil pump drive gear. It's held in place by this kind of ring. I took out the ring, now I'm removing the gear. I need to remove this bearing in this direction. We have a ring to keep it from coming out toward the middle. I'm taking off the ring, and I don't know, my puller is like this, it probably won't fit here. Alright, anyway, I'll try it now. So I took out the shafts. I got the bearing out without a puller. I just pried it out with a pry bar. It came out. Next I hooked the secondary shaft with straps. It's like on the Zonrad Fabric S690. The shaft is also at an angle and gets lifted out. I took out the secondary shaft, and after that I took out the intermediate shafts. As you can see, we also have another intermediate reverse gear here, which I didn't even remove. Maybe I didn't need to take this one out either, although who knows. This gear is positioned at the bottom and this one is on top. Alright, I took one out, I won't touch the other one. What do we see? The oil is fresh. Well, apparently the customer changed the oil, but there's this layer of metallic particles on the drain plug. Basically, there will be shavings in any gearbox. We have gears working here, synchronizers rubbing and so on. Well, I don't know. It seems to me like there's a lot of it here. Although I don't know, maybe it's left over from the last repair. Maybe. So, what are we going to do? Well, I think we won't do anything with the intermediate shafts. Here we can see that they're actually welded on. So it seems like it's not even meant to be taken apart. We can see these welding seams. Now, I'm going to disassemble the secondary shaft. As I already mentioned, the customer had some questions about the splitter. Well, basically, we saw that these teeth are worn out, by the way. These teeth here are rounded as well. As for the rest, the customer said he doesn't have any other questions. Well, in any case, I'll take apart the secondary shaft now. I'll put it in the washer and clean it. Then, as I understand it, we have a nut here. It unscrews. We unscrew the nut. And then I remove the gears, check the condition of the shaft and the condition of the bearings. I rinsed the secondary shaft, clamped it in a vise. And now as I'm looking at it, there's one thing I can't figure out. Let's try. All the gears show this kind of play on the shaft. It turns out that the gears are centered due to intermediate shafts. They hold them from both sides. So the gear isn't sitting on the secondary shaft. Well, that's how I understand it. Because how else can you explain that all the gears have this kind of play? At first, I noticed this on the reverse gear, and I thought maybe a bushing got crushed there, or there was some wear. I checked the wear on the gear and there was no wear. I looked at the shaft and basically everything was fine there too. There are marks from the cutter, from the factory machining, and now when I clamped it in the machine we can see that each gear has this kind of play. I turned the shaft over. On that side we have a retainer. I tried to take it out, but it won't come out. Apparently everything comes off in either direction. As I understand it, it comes apart very easily. We can see that we have a long key here. We take it out and it turns out that each washer is split. Well, anyway, I'll show you now. Here we remove the reverse gear and see that we have a split washer like this, and it doesn't turn because it's held by this long key. We take out this long key. Apparently it goes through all the washers. Now this washer turns and we remove the gear. And so on. The secondary shaft is disassembled as simply as possible. I took out this big long key and then you just turn and remove each washer. You don't need any pullers. There are absolutely no problems. You don't need to heat anything and you don't need to press anything. Everything comes apart really easily. What are we going to do with this gearbox? Well, just as I expected, everything here is in good condition. Here, for example, if we look at the gear, we see these sharp teeth moving on. Well, in general, I've checked all the gears and all the teeth are in perfect condition. Also, if we look at this synchronizer, here the teeth are in perfect condition. As for the splitter, we can see that things are not all good here. What we're going to replace in this gearbox? Both splitter gears. The one on the input shaft and the one on the output shaft. We can see that if we look from the splitter side, the splines on this gear are rounded like this. But if we look from the gear engagement side, these teeth here, they're still in decent condition. You could even say they're in good shape, but in any case, it's non-disassemblable, so this gear will also be new. So that's two gears and the splitter synchronizer as well. This washer doesn't seem to come with the synchronizer kit, but I don't know, we'll try to find it separately. Well, or in the worst case, of course, we can just install this old one. The main thing is that we'll have new gears and the synchronizer itself. Also, we might have to replace these ball bearings because, as we can see, they have a bit of play. And I also wanted to say a few words about the demultiplier. This is the first time I've seen this. Here, it turns out that our demultiplier isn't a planetary gear, but works through two intermediate gears like this. Either the torque is transmitted from the small gear to the large one, which results in a reduction gearbox, or the secondary shaft and the demultiplier shaft are engaged directly, and then we have a direct drive from the secondary shaft without reduction. And there is also a problem with this gearbox regarding the shifting mechanism. We can see this shaft is already. It's been ground down with an angle grinder. I don't know who did all this or when. And there's also some play. There's this kind of play. So basically this retainer presses it, and there's a spring here, so it pushes the shaft in this direction. But if you look here, there's a gap of a few millimeters between the shaft and the bushing. And you can see the condition of the shaft. I just used a grinder or sander to grind it down, I'm not sure which. It's amazing how this works. I don't know what to do with this mechanism. In theory, everything here must be replaced. The shaft, the seal, the bushing, and this solid rear support. Unscrew these two bolts and it comes out. This part on the shaft also needs replacement. As an option, we'll try to find this mechanism used as a complete assembly if possible. And also, what else is special about this gearbox? What do we have here? The cylinders, the pneumatic cylinders for engaging the splitter and the range selector, they're all located right here in this cover. This is the rod for engaging the range selector, and this is the rod for engaging the splitter, and this is the rod for engaging the actual gears. So there are two forks for the forward gears and one fork for the reverse gear. Here we have the air supply, and inside this cover the air is distributed through channels. This is the first time I've seen this. Most likely I'll be taking apart this cylinder. Actually, I'll be checking it, the one that goes to the divider. Maybe we'll replace the seal there, or... well, I don't know, I'll take it apart and we'll see. Well, maybe we'll also check the seal on the demultiplier. Anyway, alright, we'll get to that later. I need to inform the customer of the results for now. Inspection and defect analysis results, it's possible there won't be any repairs at all, because, for example, just this one synchronizer alone costs about 50,000 rubles. I don't know the customer's plans or how much he wants to invest in this gearbox, but at first glance, just off the top of my head, I think it will take about 150 to 200,000. It doesn't seem like much, but if you consider how many parts we're replacing here, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4 main ones, plus some smaller ones, then it adds up to a pretty decent amount. Well, in general, my job is to disassemble, inspect for defects, provide all the information, and the decision is up to the customers. That's it, we have such an interesting gearbox here. This is the first time in all my experience that I'm working on an Eaton gearbox. I've heard about them, but I've never dealt with them myself. Basically, it's an interesting design. It's interesting for me to see what other types of gearbox designs there are. Well, all that's left is to assemble it and not forget anything. I'm starting the assembly. I've already washed everything. The case, the lid, all the internal parts are clean. Well, there are still some on the table. In general, everything is already washed and prepared. I still need to clean off some sealant on the case itself. There are a few small tasks left. I'm starting assembly, and this is probably going to be the strangest repair I've ever had on my channel. The strangest I've had in I don't know how many years. What's special about this repair? The special thing about this repair is that we're putting everything back together just as it is. We won't be replacing any parts at all. No cones, rings, synchronizers, or anything like that. The customer is having serious financial problems. Well, anything can happen in life, so as we can see, situations like this also occur. No money for spare parts. And in general, since the gearbox still seems to be in more or less satisfactory condition, meaning it can still work for a while, the decision was made to put everything back together as it is. Most likely, I'll even make the gaskets myself. Well, for example, you definitely need a gasket here. Or if you install it without a gasket, then you need to replace these washers that we have. The adjustment ones that regulate the tapered bearings. And on this side, a gasket is also necessary. It also affects the adjustment of the bearings. For example, you can install this top cover without a gasket, for instance, using sealant, either regular or anaerobic, and so on. But all the other covers that don't affect the adjustment of the bearings can simply be installed with sealant. Well, you might say that at least the gaskets could have been bought. Well, I agree they're not that expensive. They could have been bought. But we couldn't find a separate gasket set. That is, the gaskets are sold at one of the synchronizers, I think with this one. The splitter synchronizer. No, not this one. The gasket set is sold with this synchronizer. There is no separate gasket set, but the price of this synchronizer with the gasket set is already around 50,000 rubles. So most likely I'll make homemade gaskets myself. Well, that's not really a big problem either. That's it. That's our kind of repair. So I took it apart, checked it, cleaned it, and I'm putting it back together. Like I said, anything can happen. So what's my task now? To assemble the secondary shaft, install all the gears, the synchronizers, assemble the secondary shaft, and then we'll start putting it all together. First, we install one intermediate shaft, then the secondary shaft, and then the second intermediate shaft. Here I made some marks. So for example, as you can see, this is our first intermediate shaft, and this is our second intermediate shaft key. That is, I made 2 notches right here, and I also marked everything. Where each race was, where each bearing was, where this thrust sleeve for the bearing race was, which oil seals, and so on. So everything is marked. I did all of this in advance. I expected we might need to restore everything to its original state. Also, the secondary shaft has a very unusual shape. I've never seen anything like it before. It looks kind of like an ear of corn. There are these longitudinal and transverse grooves, a very interesting shape. It has nothing in common with the secondary shaft of a Zahnrad fabric gearbox, or for example, a Mercedes. Interesting design. That's our scope. Let's begin. Feature of assembling the secondary shaft, we can see that we have this long key and it fits into one slot. So all the washers are installed. These are the thrust washers that go between the gears. The washer is installed like this and then turned like this, and this key locks all the washers from turning. It is inserted like this. That's it. As you can see, the washer won't turn anymore. And thanks to the slot, it also holds it from, basically, it keeps the washers from moving lengthwise. And our task is to align all the washers so they don't turn, so that this long key goes through all these thrust washers, and also so that this key goes through both synchronizers. And we can see that on the synchronizer, on the sleeve, one of these teeth is missing. there is a specific notch for this key. Also on the shaft, right here, there is a stop, a kind of pin. So this key should be positioned on this pin like this, so it doesn't fall through any further. And here, as I already mentioned, it holds each washer. Plus, there are two synchronizers as well. That's a particular feature of assembling this secondary shaft. But otherwise, basically everything is pretty simple. No press fits or retaining rings. Basically, it's an interesting shaft design. I've never seen anything like this before. Alright, well, that's basically it. I've assembled the secondary shaft. Next, we install this part also onto the splines, and you can see there are splines here for the reverse gear engagement. This is how it's installed. But this part is put in after the secondary shaft is installed in the housing in the block. This part with the bearing is installed. And then this gear, which goes to the demultiplier, is installed like this. This is already going the demultiplier synchronizer, and all of this is fastened with a bolt like this. But I assembled this part after the shaft is installed in the block in the housing. That's it, the shafts are assembled. The secondary shaft, the primary shaft, I didn't do anything with the two intermediate shafts, and also the demultiplier. I didn't do anything here either, just washed and blew it out. So I installed the shafts, and it turned out to be harder than I thought. At this point I wasn't filming because it took me over an hour, maybe an hour and a half, struggling with them by trial and error, so to speak. What's our biggest problem here? There are 3 shafts, but you can't align them all at once. You have to align them one after another. And there's a chance to make a mistake with the gear tooth. That means one shaft will drop slightly until the bearing aligns it. Let's say one shaft is perfectly aligned as it should be, but the second shaft is slightly lowered relative to the center, to the axis, and the wrong tooth engaged. That's it. And as a result, you can't install the bearings anymore. And then to reposition this shaft, you have to remove all the bearings again. Well, because they're in constant engagement right now, to disengage them you need to remove the bearings. Move this shaft this way, move that shaft the other way in opposite directions. Only then can you shift it by one tooth. Here on the shaft we have these marks. There are even factory marks. There are 2 zeros here and 2 zeros here. I made them brighter for easier visibility. And also on the main shaft itself. Well, not on the main shaft, but on this gear here. I also made marks. So there's a mark exactly in the middle. Then you count 22 teeth, another mark, and on this side also 22 teeth. It's exactly 180 degrees apart. Not sure how visible it is on camera. Here's the intermediate shaft and the gear. I made some stripes there for clarity, and as you can see, they line up. Let's look at the second intermediate shaft. I also have 2 stripes there, and they line up as well. So, what was the difficulty for me? It was about getting the engagement in the right place, so to speak, but when there are no bearing shells, the shafts sag, so you have to lift them up, and this gear shifts, it moves by one tooth. And I did it several times. Well, probably not several, but dozens of times. I lowered the secondary shaft, checked the marks, lifted it up, moved it by one tooth again, and lowered it again. Basically, I did all this several times, dozens of times. On this side, I marked from center to center and used them for reference, even though there was no bearing. Basically, this procedure isn't exactly simple. If I did these gearboxes more often, maybe all of this would be easier for me. But since this is my first gearbox like this, that's why I had some problems. What do I do next? Well, the shaft is moving right now because these bearings aren't fixed yet. What am I going to do next? I need to tighten these bolts with thread locker. There are 3 bolts here and 3 bolts here. And also install this thrust washer, which holds the secondary shaft bearing. Also tighten it and install the bolts with thread locker. Next I will install the oil pump. I need to lay out the tubes here. No, first I'll probably install the gear, the intermediate reverse gear and the shaft. Then I'll deal with everything I just mentioned. Next I'll lay out the tubes here and install the gear on the demultiplier. Alright, next I'm installing the oil pump. Let's take a look. The pump is basically in perfect condition. As you can see, there are almost no scratches. Usually pumps in transmissions get damaged a lot. There are deep scratches here, because a lot of metal shavings end up in the transmission. There will always be more shavings in the transmission than in the engine. Yeah, here you can see, the pump is just in perfect condition. So you simply install the intermediate plate and then the pump is installed. This is the pump drive coming from the intermediate shaft. You put on the washer, then the gear, and then the ring. That's installed. I'm installing the pump now, and here I'm laying out the tubes, basically. That's it. We'll start assembling the demultiplier now. The gearbox is nearly assembled. I just need to install the shifting mechanism's top cover. I also showed that I installed the secondary and intermediate shafts according to the marks. But for the demultiplier, everything also needs to be installed according to the marks. I installed it randomly, and now I want to remove this cover and set it according to the marks. Why did I decide to do this? Well, first of all, I looked up information on the internet. Everywhere it says that you need to install it according to the marks. Also, today I released an episode about disassembling this gearbox. Many people comment that you must install it using the marks to be safe. I took it apart and set it according to the marks. As they say, better safe than sorry. When you're unfamiliar with a mechanism and many people give you the same advice, you end up following it regardless of your preference. Now I'll try to unscrew just this cover without removing the flange, or these truss covers, or rather the ones where the bearing races rest. I'll try unscrewing it, maybe just one shaft. Not sure yet. I'll take it off first and see. I'll have to cut out a new gasket again. Well, I'll spend, I don't know, a couple of hours now. But at least I'll do everything the way it should be. Alright, now I'm working on the task I mentioned. Well, I don't know, today or tomorrow I finally need to close this lid. I've been assembling this box for... Yeah, I've been assembling it for almost a week. My washer also broke down here, so I was working on the washer, poured in some good chemicals. I bought some expensive chemicals, and my pump started leaking. Where the packing is, the gland packing, it was all dirty there. The chemicals dissolved all the dirt. My pump started leaking. I spent all of yesterday working on the washer, removing the pump and taking it apart. There was also some other work, some lathe work around the facility. I've spent a week assembling this gearbox and still can't finish it. Alright, too many words, we need more action. Let's go. So, I've taken everything apart again. And now we're going to assemble everything strictly according to the manual. We'll assemble the demultiplier exactly as described in the manual. It's assembled outside the gearbox separately. This cover here is called the auxiliary housing. We assemble everything in the auxiliary housing and then install it onto the gearbox as a whole. We can see the intermediate shafts. We have 0 marks. 2 teeth are marked. I've highlighted these 2 teeth. Here are the marks. The second shaft, or rather this is the first one I've marked, and this is the second. On this shaft we also see 0. I've highlighted these 2 teeth. That's it, the shafts are ready. Now about this gear. Our task. There are no marks on it. Our task is to make marks exactly at 180 degrees. That is, we count the same number of teeth and mark 2 teeth. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. On this side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. Here are 28 teeth on each side with 1 tooth marked on each. We take a stand with a height of 65 millimeters. We install the output shaft with the gear. We install the intermediate shafts on both sides according to the marks. Next, we put this additional housing on top, put on the bearing, put on this cover, tighten it, install the flange and tighten these bolts. And then, with the assembly complete, we install this unit onto the gearbox. Alright, let's go. splitter is assembled, shafts installed, and everything tightened, let me show you. On the shaft, you can see 2 teeth marked 0, 0. Those are my marks. You can also see my marked tooth on the large gear. You can see everything matches up. Now, on the opposite side, there are also 2 teeth marked 0, 0 on the shaft. There's a mark on the large gear as well. You can see everything matches up. Well, when everything is assembled correctly, it should rotate easily and freely like this when it's mounted on the flange. Nothing should be sticking or jamming anywhere. I made a new gasket. Now, I'm also applying sealant. A thin layer of sealant here. Then the gasket, then another thin layer of sealant on the gearbox. I hook it onto the flange and then I install the demultiplier back in place and I'll start preparing the cover for installation. I don't know, I need to assemble it today. I assembled and tightened everything. So what do I want to say? I want to say that before this I had assembled it incorrectly. When I assembled it, the shaft was spinning and it was getting stuck in some place. It would get tight and suddenly move and become easy, then tight and easy again. And it turned out that I had 29 teeth on one side and 27 teeth on the other side. So when these 29 teeth came up to the intermediate shaft, it would get tight. Basically, they were getting squeezed, then it would pass it. When it moved away from it, the gearbox would turn freely. Then it would come up to the next intermediate shaft. It would get tight again, then it would pass it, and it would be free again. So in one rotation, it would get tight twice and be free twice. So it turns out I assembled it incorrectly. If I hadn't checked now, if I hadn't done everything as advised and as written in the manuals, my demultiplier wouldn't have engaged, and I would have had to remove the drive shaft right there, drain the oil, take off all these covers again, and do all of that on the spot in the pit. That's why I want to say a big thank you to everyone who gave me this advice, that you absolutely have to align everything by the marks. Well, there I set it by the marks myself. That's the secondary shaft and the intermediate shaft. I saw that there were marks, so I knew I had to set them according to the marks. But as for the demultiplier, I kind of thought that everything would just fall into place by itself. But it turns out I was wrong. A huge thank you to everyone who gave me advice or suggestions, especially to the subscriber who sent me the repair manual for this gearbox. I'm closing the cover and installing it with just sealant no gasket. I degreased this area, cleaned the threads, and have already filled in the oil. We fill the oil up to the level of the drain plug. Well, mine turned out a little higher because the gearbox is tilted a bit. Plus, we have an empty shaft there and the pump will fill it up. Don't forget, the cover is installed. And this shaft, the rod, needs to be turned like this. Otkai, like this. The cover fits on, and then you need to turn it from here with a screwdriver. The shift rod for the splitter engages, and then the retainer is installed. Also, make sure to install this kind of plunger. This is for the sensor, the splitter engagement sensor. So I installed the cover and tightened it. Tightened the studs here, only one stud was in place, the rest had come out. Two went in, but one had stripped threads. Here I made a reinforced stud. The body is 14 millimeters and the stud here is 10 millimeters. What's the issue? This wall is very thin, aluminum, and here it's less than a centimeter, about 8 or 9 millimeters. I put it on thread locker and tightened it. Here, I already prepared everything and coated it with assembly paste. I'm also installing another plunger on the sensor right away. I think this one is for engaging the divider. I made a homemade gasket and got it ready. I also did a bit of work on this mechanism. When I was taking it apart, I showed that the shaft here was welded and ground down right with an angle grinder, not even on a lathe, just with an angle grinder. I removed this cover. There was a bushing like this in the cover. The thickness of the bushing is literally a couple of tenths of a millimeter, maybe half a millimeter. As you can see, it just crumbled and broke apart like this. I machined a new bushing and have already installed it. Basically, it's fine. There's a little bit of play here, maybe a tenth of a millimeter. I made it a bit looser because the shaft wasn't machined with a grinder. You never know where there might be misalignments, bumps, dips, and so on. I machined the bushing, pressed it in, and have already installed everything back in place. About this bushing, its outer diameter is 25.5 and the shaft diameter is 22.2. Here in this spot where we had the most wear, the diameter was 24, so 22, 24. There was 1.8 millimeters of wear. Alright, this mechanism is ready. The gasket is ready, everything here is prepared and the studs are tightened. I'm reinstalling the mechanism. I also need to install this mounting bracket here. Put in the sensors and the clutch release fork.